China is at war with us, and currently it's a Cold War. It's not necessarily kinetic boots on the ground, though. If you look at what's going on at the southern border, you look at what's going on in the South China Sea, if you even talk about the food processing plants exploding at this sort of weird record high numbers, you could maybe make the case that it's sort of already gone kinetic. But putting that aside, it really goes to what's called unrestricted warfare, which is the Chinese Communist Party's decades-long plot to destroy America from within, right? It's the idea of infiltration as opposed to invasion. They've seen from the United States in the decades-long forever wars that we've been engaged in the Middle East that it's not advantageous financially to get involved in other countries. So the way that they do it is in part through sort of foreign influence operations. And my background was in tracking these. And I saw they used to go after politicians. They used to go after people in the mainstream media. Oftentimes they would pay to take them on trips to China in exchange, for example, favorable coverage. That was a direct quote in these Foreign Agent Registration Act filings. But I saw them pivot, especially when the Biden regime came into office, and these foreign influence groups, which are part of a multi-billion-dollar political warfare operation called the United Front Work Department, they pivoted and they started going after agriculture officials here in the United States, all the way down to local levels, including mayors in really the heartland in the Midwest. And what I noticed is that this dovetailed with what is it since 2010, a 5,300% increase in Chinese Communist Party ownership of farmland here in the United States. And while we've seen some efforts from Republican officials, although I would say most of it is pretty performative to sort of counter the sale of land, we haven't really seen any meaningful action. And I'd say it's especially concerning when you see, as you were alluding to, a lot of these land, or the land that's being purchased, is either very proximal to military bases, or I think more broadly, I think it kind of goes to the COVID mindset, which is the idea that you see these different spheres of life, whether it's public health, they've been really trying to weaponize climate change as of late, or they say issues like racism. These can now all sort of be weaponized. Yeah. And I think we see the food supply being weaponized now to create division, conflict, and potentially chaos in the near future.
Natalie, how as the United States government, or everybody involved, how are you letting these people get away with literal murder, from COVID to the agriculture? Is it? I don't think it's ignorance, because when I hear ignorance it's ignorance is ignorance. Do they have dirt on these people? Are they compromised? I know, if I had to guess, Hunter's compromised, Joe Biden's compromised. But China's been doing this forever, but it's been ramped up in this past 4 years. How are they getting away with it and nobody's checking them?
We would be lucky if it were ignorance, because at least you could still kind of go with the old neocon mindset that the engagement school with China, that these people are just optimistic that if we allow China, to join the World Trade Organization, that we'll change them. They're not going to change us. But unfortunately, the issue sort of goes back to what I was talking about, that the Chinese Communist Party has waged systematic and systemic campaigns. Really, they've targeted what I call the Achilles heel here in the United States of the power brokers in media, academia, politics, all the way to the White House. Make no mistake that it's Joe Biden, right, who's sitting there, if he even knows it, in the White House right now. And the way that they do it, like I said, it comes, a lot of it, from what's called this United Front Work Department, which is a multi-billion-dollar, with the B, political warfare operation that emanates out of Beijing, where they specifically target, for example, like I was talking about, people in the mainstream media. For over 10 years, they had these programs under this group, again, very innocuous, very nice sounding, called the China-United States Exchange Foundation. I always say buried lead. They put China first.
Yeah, of course. Smart.
But they were paying to take journalists from CNN, the Washington Post, New York Times, the Harvard Business Review, even local papers, and they were paying to take them, all expenses paid, trips to China. And upon return, again, this was all evidenced in Foreign Agent Registration Act filings, but they're obviously not going to expose themselves. They're not going to report on it. But it showed that upon return, they had to, quote, disseminate positive messages and provide, quote, favorable coverage. So China has really created this ecosystem in Washington, D.C., where they've bought off the media, so they're not going to report on it. And Hunter Biden, they've bought off the politicians. They've bought off sort of the American princelings, right? Their children are all somehow in business with the Chinese Communist Party. So it really is a devilishly evil form of brilliance that the Chinese Communist Party has waged. It's political warfare at its finest, but it's the concept of strangling us with our own systems. In other words, because we are a free and open society, because we allow our businesses to go overseas and engage with China, you don't see that same reciprocity in China.
Yep.
That's how they corrupt these individuals. And unfortunately, when we have a ruling class that I think to their core hate America, they're not going to stand up for it because they don't see that there's anything unique about America that's worth defending.
Rob.
A perfect example of this is how Gavin Newsom rolled out the red carpet when she came to San Francisco. They put up giant fencing.
Yeah.
They evacuated all of the homeless, cleared out downtown San Francisco.
Not one flag, Rob. Not one of our flags.
No,
was
not
seen.
at all. And people were standing on the streets waving the Chinese flags. And you're like, well, wait a minute. Whatever happened to America first? And
Totally.
And it was, when you look at that, obviously there are solutions to the problems that America is facing. If they can clean the streets up for when foreign dignitaries come to the United States, why can't they keep the streets cleaned up the other 364 days out of the year? Why is it only when the president of China comes do we clean up our shit?
That's it right there, Kelly. Guys, look at Kelly. You show that. Look at this. Watch this. Look at bro.
That's terrifying because,
American
I
flag.
saw one American flag, but wait, is it doubled with the Chinese flag?
They're holding both.
And
It's holding
smaller.
both.
They even put fencing up too, just in case you want to get over and do something.
You can't get near that guy.
That's insane.
And then you look at some of the athletes in the United States who kowtow to the Chinese. Look at John Cena when he upset China by saying that Taiwan was it an independent country is what he said.
Yeah.
And then he issued an apology in Mandarin.
Yeah.
Not even in English. He apologized in Mandarin.
You speak Mandarin, bro?
Yeah.
And then there was an article that came out from the New York Times this week. It's titled, "China will use AI to disrupt elections in the United States, South Korea, and India." This according to Microsoft. So
because
unfortunately, Microsoft is the one that's warning you about it. So it's an evil corporation warning you.
To do what, Rob? To interfere with elections?
Interfere in the elections using artificial intelligence in the United States, South Korea, and India. So not only have they corrupted our politicians, but now they're trying to corrupt and influence the elections among the American people.
Yeah, what's scary too is they can't have Trump back in there. They can't have him in there.
That's a great point.
They can't have him in there because all of the scheming that they've been doing, right? China, all the scheming that they've been doing goes through Biden. It goes through Biden.
Right. Well,
they can't have Trump back in there. So no matter what, they have to rig this.
That should scare the shit out of everybody. Because I wanted to ask you, Nat. This is my opinion. If this was a movie, 2020, the president of whatever country is like, we're going to keep China accountable, to hell with them, keep them trained and blah, blah. Then all of a sudden, a virus, guys, comes out of a lab from there. They don't get held accountable. So do you think, Natalie, that that's a feasible assumption that this lab leak came out of this place to get this president out, and then going to Brady's point, this 2024 election, with Rob saying with all this, by the way, we're having like little test runs of all these outages and these hacks. What do you think? What do you think, Nat?
Well, fun fact on Microsoft, they actually created Windows China Government Edition. So the Chinese Communist Party actually runs and administers the country using Microsoft technology. So I think it is very funny, and you are very correct that a lot of this cybersecurity outage narratives that we're hearing, which of course dovetails quite nicely with what the World Economic Forum is warning us about in Davos, that a lot of these companies that are in bed with the Chinese Communist Party, I think it's sort of some weird dry runs going on. And I think you could also make the case that a lot of this, pandemic prevention talk that you were hearing about prior to COVID, I always say pandemic prevention is the largest racket that we've seen in this country because the same people who were supposed to be preventing COVID-19 profited, whether financially or in terms of power, from it actually happening. And when you look at how they covered up what happened at the Wuhan Institute of Virology and how we see reporting that it wasn't just NIAID and NIH and Anthony Fauci, but that it was over a dozen federal agencies that were attuned that there was gain-of-function research going on at the Wuhan Institute of Virology, and not a single person said anything. That is when you realize that there was a massive cover-up that went on. But I think, frankly, the more sinister take on all of the COVID stuff is not just that the Chinese Communist Party was acting alone, but that it sort of is that really tale as old as time that I was alluding to in the beginning, which is that there's this sort of elite merger between the United States and the Chinese Communist Party, and that we are funding our own demise by funneling millions of dollars to Chinese.
But also, doesn't Bill Gates, I'm sorry to cut you off, I apologize, but doesn't Bill Gates have a huge play in this as well, working with the Chinese Communist Party, of buying farmland? Do you know what I'm saying? Because I saw a whole thing about how Bill Gates owns predominantly most of the farmland in the U.S.
You're very correct. And I would say the Chinese Communist Party, in conjunction with sort of the American ruling class, epitomized by people like Bill Gates,
Right.
are buying up massive swaths. But what's very, very interesting is that there are some groups that are part of this united front called they have all these very funny sounding names. It's like the Chinese People's Association for Friendship and Foreign
Right, right.
Contact.
Okay.
And Bill
Sounds
Gates,
nice.
right? Bill Gates has headlined a ton of their events. He's partnered with them. He's given them money. So there are these bridges that exist between these kind of Chinese influence groups that are targeting the farmland. And I always say, where there's smoke, there's fire. Yeah. If Bill Gates and the Chinese Communist Party are collaborating on something,
you're screwed.
Is there more than a fire? It's more than a fire, Nat. Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, so besides Bill Gates, who would you say are the chief culprits in the whole merger of the U.S. elite with China? I mean, like Chamber of Commerce, I know comes up a lot. Who are like the top lobbyists, and who are the top
that we
like,
see, Shane,
yeah,
that are in our face,
that you know of, that are just need to be known about how much of a role they play in this?
Sure, the Chamber of Commerce have certainly played a big role. There's an AmCham China branch, and they are always lobbying, whether it's Congress or just making sure that their companies can do business in China. And I think that that's one of the quickest pipelines that you see these companies, their executives get corrupted. But honestly, my take on who we need to focus on, who we need to shine the spotlight on, it's the names that people don't know. They're not the household names. It's the people who are sort of the shady, swampy lobbyists who are only listed on the FARA filings, working, and these are people who, I think the worst part of it is that used to be federal employees, right? Used to have taxpayer subsidized salaries, who are now leveraging those connections to work as lobbyists, to work as consultants for not just the Chinese Communist Party, but in some cases, Chinese Communist Party owned, military entities, firms and companies that are directly tied to the People's Liberation Army. So it's those people who have really helped them go after and target, like I always say, the Achilles heel of this country. One of the groups, I believe it was Wilson Global Communications, set up, believe it or not, an exchange between the Chinese Communist Party, a similar kind of pay-for-play trip with the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation, who, of course, accuses everyone of being racist.
Yeah.
But meanwhile, they were sending high school and college-age students, African Americans, and upon return, these students were compelled to write testimonials about their trips and experiences in China. And I kid you not, one of the quotes, the girl literally said, "China is an amazing communist country that I hope will surpass the United States one day." That's a direct quote.
That's
So they're brainwashing young Americans in exchange for Chinese Communist Party cash.
Rob, what are you going to say?
When it comes to Bill Gates, because you had mentioned that he is owning massive amounts of farmland in the United States, he actually is the largest private landowner in the United States, with more than 269,000 acres of farmland across many states in the United States, specifically Nebraska. He keeps buying up farmland in Nebraska. However, this information that I just told you is 2 years old. So imagine how much more farmland he has purchased in the past 2 years.
Yep.
And then something's very interesting about 2020. Let's try and not use trigger words. About 2020.
Yes.
There were no consequences for the Chinese government for being at least complicit or
unleashing is the word I
whatever
use.
you want to say. There's been no consequences at all. Not a fine. Nobody's been imprisoned. Meanwhile, in the United States of America, citizens in our country faced more repercussions than China itself, who may or may not have created the virus, by standing up for their rights and saying, "No, I didn't want to take this, this jab or that jab." Those people were put in positions where they had to choose between taking their job or taking a shot. And if they chose not to take the shot, they were fired from their job. So our own government allowed our citizens to be persecuted for a virus that China released, and yet we don't hold the country that released that virus accountable at all.
That makes absolutely, like I say, unbelievable. And that's going to get to my question I want to ask you now, and then I'll go around and ask you guys too. How are we going to stop them? And mind you, Natalie, I'm always optimistic because I don't care what anybody says. Trump was the answer. And I hope to God they don't try to do something stupid or trying to unleash something where we can't have this election. How do we stop them? Is Trump the initial shot back into their face? Because at least now he knows who the enemy is. And I want to know your opinion on that.
Of course. And Trump actually sanctioned a lot of these kind of shady front groups that were operating at the behest of Beijing. And I think, honestly, the way that you counter this is by talking about it. And I know that's always a cliche answer, but for so long, these Chinese Communist Party influence groups have been able to get away with it because no one has been reporting on them, because the only media ecosystem that existed was bought and paid for by the Chinese Communist Party. But when you have shows like this, shows like The War Room, just general independent media rising up as we're seeing right now, I think that's how you push back. And a lot of these groups that I've talked about have taken down their websites. A lot of them have sort of ceased to exist, which I find really great. Of course, they always rebrand. But I think the best kind of tell and how you know we're over the target was about a month ago that the Biden regime came out with a report from, I believe it was maybe the Government Accountability Office or something in that realm, and they said, well, everyone who's crying wolf about China owning farmland, you guys are all conspiracy theorists because we don't actually have the numbers. We don't know who owns farmland in the United States.
They never have the numbers, do they?
Right? And it's like, well, that doesn't necessarily prove that we're wrong. It just proves that you don't know, which is almost more concerning. So I definitely think we just need to keep pushing, but just be aware of and like even when we're already raising the red flags about this whole weird cybersecurity stuff that they're spinning. So I think knowledge really is power, and just by even listening to this show, believe me, they wish you couldn't.
Or the War Room, because that's how I found you. But so what's this clip that you have here? Can you set it up for us, Natalie, before we see it?
Sure. So this guy is Nick Burns. Now he's our ambassador to China. He used to be a consultant for big DC swampy think tank.
He's a swamp creature
in bed with China. He said China is not an enemy; they're a collaborator. We need them. We can't get rid of them.
Oh, he's an alligator. He's a swamp creature.
You'll see. Now, there's two important notes for this video.
Yeah.
One is that he's actually speaking, catch this, at the anniversary of the China-United States Exchange Foundation, a known communist front group that is trying to actively take down the United States because, of course.
What a sweetie pie.
And secondly, he alludes to a couple working groups having been established between the United States and China under the Biden regime. And two of them were reported publicly having to do with commerce and trade. But the third one that he mentions has to do with agriculture and farmland. And why this is so interesting, the Biden regime never announced it publicly. And I think this was sort of a slip on his part because they know that it would be so woefully unpopular with the American people right now because they're actively collaborating with a country that is, they have a history of seizing the means of production. I don't think we should let them be purchasing our farmland. So if you want to roll the video, we can.
Okay, yeah, can we show the video?
Bilateral working groups to communicate on economic issues and work out our differences, including Treasury's economic and financial working groups, the Department of Commerce's commercial issues working group and information exchange on export controls, and the agricultural working groups between our two governments. The purpose of these groups is to provide ongoing channels for our teams to drill into the substance of economic, trade, and financial policy issues. We're focusing on specific, high-priority economic topics on which we can make tangible progress. These are important developments to position our two governments to support a continuation of robust trade. We are
robust my ass. I don't trust any of these people, and the fact that, Natalie, our border, Rob, what was the number? We've arrested. Forget about the getaways. It went from just 4 years ago, we had 300 Chinese nationals arrested to 400 to 300. And then last year, 23,000 Chinese nationals arrested. This year, Q1, 24,000 Chinese nationals. And you nailed it. This is a war. But anytime you hear war, what do you think of? Tanks, bombs, babies, people crying. No. This is a strategic TikTok, get the brain of the kids. Go buy all the farmland. Go cyber attack them. And they're setting up all their pieces for like an end game type of situation. I'm telling you, they own our asses. And I think, and you nailed it, Natalie, that the Biden family with Obamas, Hunter and they can do whatever they want. And it's, what are you going to say, Rob? You going to say something?
Look at the Chinese spy balloon that flew across the entire United States. And when did we act? After it completed its mission and it was over the ocean, and then it was safe for us to shoot down. But we confirmed that it was Chinese owned. It was surveillance technology, and we let it fly all the way across from Alaska through Canada, all the way through the United States before shooting it down once it got over water on the eastern seaboard. So it went across the entire United States. It got all of the information that it needed, and the Biden administration does just enough to make it look like we're not in bed with the Chinese by acting, but they act after the mission has been completed.
100%. And I think, and then throughout the year, I think there was like 2 or 3 of them that just kept happening as if
there was one that they shot down over Lake Michigan, and they still won't. They have video footage of it, but they have not released the video footage. Have you heard about that one? The mysterious UFO object that was over Lake Michigan. They shot down, and nobody has reported on that at all since it happened. That was 7-8 months ago.
Yeah, and the main one that was hovering over Malmstrom Air Force Base, Montana, shout out to I was stationed there, is a nuclear missile base. Just throwing that out there. We had, when I was there, 200 intercontinental ballistic missile.
They let you in charge?
I was a flight security control. Yeah, but dude, think about it. This thing was hovering over that base. What?
Yeah.
What? It's a war, but like I said, it's not a thing. And the powers that be have sold their souls for riches. This is like biblical stuff because they think once the takeover happens, they're going to be taken care of. But guys, this is China.
Yeah.
You know the history of China? You know who's the most murderous? The most murderous regime out of all of them. It wasn't Hitler. It wasn't Stalin. Who was Mao killed in 4 or 5 years? 45 million of his own people. This communism keeps going, and it's coming here, and it's scary as shit. And again,
but don't forget about their concentration camps they have right now too.
Oh, what do you mean?
For the Uyghurs? No one's talking about that.
They also have in their books,
that?
like Xi Jinping writes how, by 2050 we want to achieve this goal, and the whole idea is like they have been biding their time. Like Mao wanted to take on the United States, and in one essay he says it's fine if we go to nuclear war. If the Earth gets destroyed in nuclear bombs, it would be better than if we sit and allow the capitalists to continue to oppress us.
Can you imagine that?
And like reading Mao is just insane because like he's almost funny in this really like weird, devilishly charming way in that he doesn't give a shit about human life at all. Like it doesn't faze him at all. And he's like, none of this really matters. And like, we're just some animals on a planet. And like, who really cares if like 100 million Chinese die? It would be good if it's towards the goal of global communist revolution. So it's like that philosophy is what we're dealing with. And then like their chairman, their presidents outline what they want to do by 5, 10, 25, 50-year goals where they say, we want to take over this much amount of the earth. We want to be this much more productive. Our presidents get in for 4 years and throw shit at the wall and complain about each other, and then they're out again. Yeah. We don't have any far-reaching goals as a country. We don't have any visionary leaders. We don't even have like a uniting philosophy for a country to live by. And China is, they might not have personal freedoms. They might not have like anything good about the quality of life, but they have this like overarching ambition to like conquer the world. And like it's not even about if we can replace Biden with some guy who currently wants to restrict them. We need to replace them with someone who is as far-looking as them and far-reaching as them. Otherwise, it's like the world is for those who want to take it, and they right now want to take it.
And guess what? You got to give them credit where credit's due because they're playing the long game. They're trying to win and destroy us. Go ahead.
You're talking visionary instead of reactionary, and I feel like that's where we're at.
We've been for 20 years, 30 years as a country. It's just reactionary.
Who was the last visionary that we had in office?
I mean, Trump was kind of visionary, but it's Make America Great Again. Like it's backwards. The neocons were kind of visionary, but it's spread democracy around the world, which isn't really a strategy because it's just we, the military class, will become rich while everyone else in the country becomes poor. Like they don't care. They didn't care about the citizens, and it wasn't a real vision. I mean, like, and I mean, really, like, I wouldn't even say Reagan. I would say like JFK's last like vision.
Yeah, and look what happened to somebody that has a vision.
Yeah,
they shoot you in the head.
Well, they did it to a bunch of people that year. Martin Luther King Jr.
King. Oh yeah, they're like, hey guys, vision, peace, and love. Nope, we're not having that shit. But all right, guys. Oh, and also Patrick, actually, funny, Natalie. Patrick just put a video on Valuetainment called "Farmer's Last Stand." And Kelly, that's about China and everything.
That looks good.
That looks amazing.
That's a good thumbnail.
global protests around the world about farmers. I haven't seen it, but that dude, the thumbnail, everything looks. All these guys did a freaking fantastic job. But all right, guys, we're gonna be Natalie. I love you. You made me hate China even more. And by the way,
Yay.
and I want everybody to know this. You can hate China just like people hate America. Doesn't make you racist. The regime, and I love that you call it the Biden regime because it is a regime.
Yes.
You can hate China and what they stand for. Doesn't mean I hate the people. I have Chinese friends. Like,
I love Chinese food.
They're
I
the
love
most repressed by the Chinese
They
regime.
don't. Yeah, exactly. So trust me, they're on my side.